Cool. So we're just kick it off and start telling some stories. So actually, Nathan and myself here really early on when we were kids convinced our parents to buy a house on Banks Avenue called the Banks House. Now we call it the Banks House because it was on Banks Ave. And it was really weird because we had our monthly worship gathering this past Tuesday night, and this young guy came up to me and basically was like, hey, me and a buddy are really wanting to start a community, to get a house and start a community, and just want to know if anybody from UP would be willing to sit down and just talk to us about that. And as we got to talking, he was like, yeah, we're like 19 years old. I play guitar, my buddy plays drums, and we sat down with my mom the other week and we're talking to her about trying to help us buy a house. And it was literally verbatim, like pretty much the process with Nathan and I of being like 19 and wanting to pursue community and just do something that kind of kept the passion alive and not just kind of get sucked into the standard kind of college age process. And so we convinced our parents to help us buy a house and just kind of help us pursue this harebrained idea. And our parents were incredible and generous and supported us and helped us grab this house in sort of this like somewhat sketchy neighborhood. And we started just having worship nights and stuff like that. Soon thereafter, we met Michael Ketter soon thereafter, and a couple scattered worship nights quickly became like a weekly thing, and we just kind of launched into this season of being a group of bachelors that sort of started forming a community and being wild and grungy and just crazy and spontaneous, and ended up getting together every single Tuesday and just not really having any expectation other than we were going to see what happens, and there wasn't really much of an agenda to it. And we'd show up and have weeks where we were tired and didn't know what to do, and we'd show up some weeks and just be absolutely stoked and jump right in. Sometimes it would take an hour, 2 hours to really settle into what God was saying. And sometimes we'd just be right there instantly, and it just didn't matter because it was like the ritual of spending time together without any super rigid expectation that kind of enabled us to kind of open boxes in ourselves and in each other, and really like open the box of God, where are you? And we don't want to force this. We want to just wait until we're like our ears are open enough to really hear your still so small voice. And I think we really began to learn in a big way that God he truly does possess this stillness and this gentle voice, and that's just the way he likes to roll. Because a lot of what we know of culture and human nature is to be loud and boisterous and demanding and sometimes manipulative, and God's not that way. And so when we wait, he's able to introduce himself. And so that was kind of the process of those years, I feel like, for us running together.
Yeah. A lot of
stage one.
Yeah, a lot of the vision for the house came from the year before we got the house, we did the Iris Ministries, like had a missionary school in Mozambique. You might have heard of Heidi Baker, but they run an orphanage and plant churches out there. And so that was in 2006, the year before we did the house, and we spent 3 months living in, sharing these houses with a bunch of other people from all around the world. And we had that like a 3-month community experience that was really set the bar really high. Like I'm sure you guys, some of you have experienced this, whether it was in college life or YWAM or something or even just the worship school for a week. Just that level of intentionality and proximity, sharing meals together, just being in close quarters is a big deal. And I think coming home from that experience in 2006 was, how do we keep that going in Knoxville? How do we keep that going in our life? And it was really just Will and I starting from scratch, but that was the shared, heart we had, is we both had that experience, and we knew that we wanted to some way keep living that out. And I think that was we had just enough confidence to come to our parents with, we don't know exactly what's going to happen, but we know we are looking for this and we want this, like we're willing to fight for it. And I think we had just enough, courage to do it. And then, God started unveiling things as we went, what that looked like. And part of it was getting a bunch of recording equipment. We had space in the house for a studio, so we turned one of the bedrooms into a little home studio, and kind of naturally started recording songs we were writing out of the house. Even recording like the worship times we would do on Tuesday, where we'll have this little mic and he'd hang it from the chandelier, like in the living room, and just push record, and we'd be able to remember things. And so those were the early days in 2007, 2008. What else? What happened next? That's Michael. Michael's around 2008. Michael's started coming in, like being a part of the community, and then we outgrew the Banks house. We went to Michael and Ivy's house. I think probably by 2009. I think we were probably in your house, Michael, if I remember right. So at that point, we were having 50 to 100 people, I think, in your house every Tuesday night. I remember people lining the staircase, and I lived a couple houses down. And there was one time where there were so many people in the house, and there was only one bathroom up the stairs. And I decided to go to my house to go to the bathroom, because it would be easier to walk outside than it was to go up the stairs. Those are, such good memories from back then. So that would have been 2009. Yeah, there was that unfortunate time. Yeah, so after we eventually outgrew the Michael's house, and then we kind of moved around in Knoxville, just what any venue we could find that was free. And we ended up in this basement of like a homeless ministry. And there was no windows, and it was like a cafeteria. And I remember there's always this one spot that smelled like throw up, right? You like walk in, and every time it was like somebody throws up at the same place, like every week. But there was no airflow, and it was the summer in Tennessee, and it surely got to 95 degrees in there. And
95 stale degrees.
Just no wind, humidity, swamp-like. It was bad.
Yeah, we went to the outdoor amphitheater thing downtown for a couple months. That was hot as anything, but it was relief compared to being in that basement for sure. I mean, part of the journey too was right when we got the house, we got some recording equipment and slowly started learning how to record, and kind of simultaneously became more and more excited about just like capturing the raw, like unedited sound of like all of us in a room together. But then also we're like learning how to make more creative music and craft layers and sounds and stuff like that, and kind of just slowly learn to become producers. So like all at the same time, we were like slowly trickling out both those sides of the coin when it came to like music and content. So we were cutting our teeth on like learning how to, craft drum sounds and tones and guitars and layers and vocals, and kind of doing that in our little like project studio that we created with our little glass window, and made some of the first recordings ever, like of like the song "Fill Me Up" and "Come Away" and a lot of songs like that. Michael's song "You're Beautiful" was recorded that way. The cover that he did of that song, and we all did that at the Banks house. All that stuff, the record "Endless Years" that I recorded, we did at the Banks house, but it was more that studio kind of creative vibe, and we all just like sat as a band with like headphone speakers in and just listened to each other and played and crafted those songs. But then at the same time, we're having these worship nights. And just felt this like raw energy of a room full of people, and then kind of started making up, choruses a lot of times at the very end of the night, we would end up making up courses that were almost like a response of what the room had been kind of praying or singing throughout the night. So it was actually, I was trying to remember what year it was we recorded live at the Banks House.
I think that was 2010.
2010. Yeah, maybe it was end of the year 2010 that we've been doing that for a number of years, and then just kind of took those courses and recorded them. And because we had been learning how to record music, we weren't very impressed by those recordings because we were just like, this sounds really, really rough. And at one point I like started mixing them down, and Nathan listened and was like, I don't know if we can release this. Like, this is
I was like,
let's just borderline embarrassing.
Not put that out.
Yeah, because we're trying to go forward here in like audio quality, and this feels like a step backwards. But I think at the end of the day, we just kind of knew that we were telling the story of the community in that moment, and that was really like more important than crafting some sort of beautiful piece of art or something in that moment. And so we just did it anyway. And I feel like it was a both and, like, we weren't just like demonizing art or anything like that, but we were also trying to say yes to that moment. So I think as we've gone on, we've continued to value both sides of that coin, and continue to value even like the simplicity of spontaneous songs, but also recognize that that's going to be a really one-dimensional story if that's all there is. Like, even gatherings in general are a one-dimensional story if that's all there is. And so really all that stuff flowed out of relationships that were way more three-dimensional than just what happened at worship gatherings or Tuesday nights.
Mm-hmm.
And so over the years, it's like we've just continued to say it's both and. The things we experience and the rituals and the lessons we learn and the ways we express ourselves. A phrase that we've always been really attracted to by an author we love is transcend and include. So we just continue to learn how to grow and change and learn more, and allow our perspective to expand about the things that are important and the things we love, but also celebrate and remember what we've been a part of, and the beauty of, like, simple moments.
Mm-hmm.
You remember that process? Oh, that's true. Yeah. No, I mean, you might remember it better than me. I mean, I do remember over the course of like 2 or 3 years, I just kept this journal basically where I would just like write down after the night. I would like desperately try to remember like something about some chorus we sang, and I didn't have any kind of smartphone with voice memo app. I just literally had to write down phrases and then like try and write little notes or something above it to remember melodies and stuff like that. But I kept this journal and just slowly started stacking up these little chorus ideas, and kept kind of going back to it and referencing it. And yeah, before we sat down to have those nights, I just slowly started realizing that we could piece together a lot of the little choruses and refrains. And so yeah, some of the stuff from that night was different things that had gotten pieced together.
I mean, if we would have known that people would actually listen to the album, I think we would have felt the pressure to do it a different way. But we didn't, as a band, we didn't practice it. The only thing that I remember is Will and Andrea worked through some of the chording and a little bit of the structure. But we just set up that day, and like I had no idea what we were doing, and I couldn't even really hear because there was no monitor. So I just like watched Will's hand, and I was like trying to play djembe. So when I listen to the live at the Banks House, I hear us playing and not having a clue what's going on, and now I kind of like laugh about it. But I was just amazed, and still am, that album particularly resonated with so many people. So I learned a good lesson there, that just don't minimize the art you're making, because you don't understand where it's going to go. And so we're often our biggest critics. So you just do your thing and let it go,
Yeah. I mean, overall, I think we're all really thankful for like the experience of being able to be young enough and naive enough to not really care or have any idea about the implications. And there was zero pressure, in that room. Like, we weren't really recording a live album. We were just like having a worship night, like all the other worship nights we did, and just had some microphones and recorded it. But we had no idea what would come of it. And I think, like, if we had known, honestly, I would, if I'd known that it was going to be listened to like 5 or 10 years later, I would have been stressed. I would have been terrified, mortified, and it probably wouldn't have really turned out. You kind of grow into those. You grow into knowing how to manage those expectations, and it takes time. So it was fun to be young. Yeah, still young.
I mean, I think part of what was unique about the record, besides just the way it was recorded, was it. Along with it was the visual. So we happened to film the recording night. My wife filmed along with actually Michael Carr, he's helping set up all the camera stuff, and then we had my brother was there, and we just had a hodgepodge of SLRs filming, and we just that was right when that camera technology was available to shoot in really like low light environments for the first time, really. So because there was visuals and images with the music, I think that, and YouTube to put it on, it was like everything came together and people could see and feel a part of that space. I don't know. I think people were ready for that expression, of worship. And I also think a lot of people, that is their expression. Their time encountering God and being in the presence of God is with a small group of people in a humble small church. And I think hearing songs that people could go, oh, I can play that. Like, there's just 3 chords on the acoustic guitar and a djembe. Okay, I'm in. Like, there was like an openness and an invitation that people felt a part of versus something that felt really way too polished or too professional. And we didn't, mean for that to happen. But now looking back, I think that was part of it. People were invited into it. I don't know. I don't know if we're qualified to answer that. I think practically in 2010, the amount of people releasing independent worship albums was, I don't know the number, but it's a lot smaller than it is in 2018. So I think there's a lot more people putting out things now. And so when there's a lot of content, there's a lot of, options. So I think that's just a really practical thing, that there wasn't a lot of people, doing, independent projects. Now every, church of 500 people or more is probably putting out, their, songs they're writing, which is great. It's a great thing.
I feel like the whole, you don't want to call it an industry, but like the whole industry or culture of worship music today is completely different than it was in 2010. And that whole kind of low pressure conversation, like, I think we didn't have a grid as much of a grid of this is like a valid, popular thing to pursue.
Yeah.
Even the town we were in and were raised in, there wasn't that kind of culture, that kind of like, this is this thing that you can do and make a career out of and be successful, and lots of people hear your songs. And so we didn't have that kind of pressure. And I think we were, by God's grace, able to just like experience a really, really humble, vulnerable form of worshiping and expressing ourselves. And I think people were really attracted to that. I think everybody is attracted to vulnerability. And even the story of like us not even knowing whether we could release that specific project because we didn't know whether to be like embarrassed by it. That's just like, like an example of how vulnerable it really was. And I think at the end of the day, people were like really attracted to that kind of vulnerability. And we were able to like, I think, maintain that for the long haul in some way. And deep inside on a gut level, just knew that it wasn't going to carry a lot of weight or hold a lot of value unless we maintained that level of vulnerability in the things we were expressing. And it's like we knew somewhere inside us that no matter what we're saying or expressing, we have to feel scared to say it for it to be really coming from a real place. Like we have to feel like it's a risk that we're taking to say what we're saying, or sing what we're singing, or record what we're recording, or just do what we're doing in general. And that was maybe somewhat of a compass for us, just like take a risk and be vulnerable and know that, our Father loves it when we jump out of the boat and run after him, and I think people are just, always going to be attracted to that.
So I remember, I don't know what's going on right now. Okay. So I remember one time when United Pursuit started like getting lots of invitations to play, and you guys were traveling a whole lot, and you kind of put a halt on that, and you said we need to be more involved in the community. Do you remember that, Will? Talking about?
Yeah, we came back from a pretty exhausting tour that we had put together, and it was really fun. But I think we came back kind of like very drained, and we're just kind of looking at the next couple years, realizing that if we said yes to a lot more stuff like that, the like fuel of what we were doing wasn't going to be there to like continue to write, to continue to like connect with God and feel what he was saying and what he was doing. Like we just recognized that like going out and traveling and playing, worship sets over and over is very draining. And like being home and doing that and being in your community is actually life-giving. It's like, it's where the creativity and the content and the stories come from. And so we just realized we would so much rather think creatively about a way to do that at home more and still somehow share it, with people outside our town that wanted to hear it. And so we just started dreaming about that and started thinking about getting a more permanent space and figuring out how to live stream so we can be in two places at once, in a sense.
Yeah, that really brought in kind of I feel like if I was going to look at United Pursuit's history, there was a whole big section, a big chapter that, I call like the Fifth Ave House chapter, which was the name for the warehouse that we ended up raising money for and buying. So that was, Michael, you're talking about, I think 2012 is when we started having these thoughts of, what would it be like to be more intentional about putting more roots out in Knoxville. And so we kind of concocted a pretty elaborate plan. It gets crazier and crazier as I get older, but we ended up finding a warehouse that we liked that was for sale, but we began raising money through Kickstarter. So we had a 30-day, actually it was not Kickstarter, it was Indiegogo, which was the nice cool cousin of Kickstarter.
Stepchild.
Yeah, the stepchild. We now call it Indie No because we now are not going to do that again. But we raised a bunch of money, or $110,000 in 30 days, which was probably the craziest third month of my life. I think it was really tough, really challenging. We don't need to go into all that, but it basically was a 6-month process. After we raised $100,000, we kind of took that story to some other donors in Knoxville, some other kind of nonprofits, and we cobbled together enough money to buy this warehouse and do some real basic renovations. So I think about a year. So by 2013, we were now meeting in the Fifth Ave warehouse on every Tuesday night, and that kind of became a whole new experience of learning to live stream and leading worship now in a warehouse. We're not in a living room, and that kind of created a whole new batch of songs, which it eventually made it on the album Simple Gospel, which was a good sort of way to distill down a couple of years of music into this album. Yeah, I feel like that was like phase 2 of United Pursuit or something. I don't know.
Yeah, you guys have talked a lot about the music and everything. Can you kind of touch on the community aspect of what United Pursuit is?
Yeah, totally. Well, the community, every year we get older, is the more diverse and stretched out we get. So I feel like if you think of our story on a spectrum, we started from, one side, Will and I, 2 dudes in one house, and everything was like hyper just focused in this one place. And as we grew, the community spread out in Knoxville, and now we are meeting all different kinds of people, and people are moving into Knoxville, and then our numbers grew, and now we have people in Dallas, and then half of our group moves out to the West Coast in California, and I don't know. It's interesting. I think it's just it wasn't the plan, but it's what happened, and I think recognizing that's what was in the in the cards for us is our community didn't stay hyper focused. It's just kind of gotten more diverse and broad, and I love it. Personally, I live in Knoxville, and I live in a neighborhood with a bunch of other friends that live really within a couple blocks, and so I have various different expressions of my kind of daily life. Sharing meals with people, parties, house church, kind of expression on Sundays. So it looks a lot different than Michael, probably what you're experiencing out in LA. So, but I think it all connects somehow. I don't know.
I would sort of potentially define it this way. I think over the years, when it was hyper focused, it was a lot more like centralized. And over the years, what we think of as United Pursuit became a small group of relationships that are spread all over the place, that we've just maintained a level of closeness and a level of creative partnership. And really our community is not like the United Pursuit community or something. Our community, especially our local community, is way more diverse than just a United Pursuit community. We began to see what we would consider spiritual family relationships form in the midst of the music we were making or the brand we had. And those spiritual family relationships, like the kind of friendships you have that last your whole life, where you realize I care about this person or that person and our relationship together a lot more than some brand we have or some activity we can pursue together.
It sounds a whole lot more healthy. The way you word it sound a little wild country.
Wild, wild country. No. Well, maybe. Yeah, we're a cult.
We spread out instead of taking over all of Knoxville.
If we're wild, wild country, then Michael is the guru.
There you go.
Sheila.
And Ivy's Sheila.
We don't like her.
It's a documentary if you guys haven't seen it about a cult. Blow your mind.
Intense. Disclaimer.
Well, okay, so before I let everybody start asking questions, can you kind of share with us what you feel like you hear God saying now, like to you guys and everything, on a personal level?
I think for myself, I feel like 10 years later, for me, I feel like my life has gotten more complicated, and I think there's a lot of spiritual voices that have been pointing towards recognizing that the gray areas of life are as significant as the black and white areas. And I think maybe in our like a lot of our spiritual traditions and our Christian traditions, we've learned to like focus a lot on the black and whites and the yeses or nos. But there's a lot to be celebrated in the midst of the gray of our human experience. And when life gets complicated and confusing or hard, it's harder to swing towards black and white. And I think, I don't know, if anything, we're all really passionate about learning how to integrate a more holistic conversation into our spiritual experience and our spiritual practices and our relationships and our rituals. So a huge thing on our hearts is expanding our language, expanding our spiritual language for who God is and where he is, because he's everywhere. He's not just in our worship time or just in our Christian lingo. He's in all that, and he's so much more broad and beautiful in our current language. And so even the way we sing songs or the way we gather together or the way we do life, there's room to expand our vision and our dreams and what it all looks like. And I think maybe when we were younger, we were a part of a tradition that said that Christianity is kind of freeze-framed in this way, and if you don't do it this way, it's not legitimate. And I think we don't believe that anymore. We believe that who God is so much more vast and deep. He's a deep river and a deep well that humans will never fully grasp, so we're always supposed to be renewing our minds and our language, and every generation has to explore and grow and take risks and figure out how to talk about him in a new way. Because if you just use the old language, I think we're not going to know how to reach the world with beauty and truth. So I think that's what we're all called to. I think every generation is called to reimagine how to talk about God, and that's what we want to do.
Yeah, man. I always ask myself these questions. Me and Ivy do this a lot. We're like, what is it that we believe as Christians that maybe we've learned that's not necessarily the truth? Because Christians used to believe that you could have slaves, and they were huge a part of that, or they would believe that Jews were terrible. There was a whole time when Christianity taught that Jews were these horrible people.
Right.
What are the things even today in our culture, in our society, are we believing purely out of a religious standpoint and not necessarily who God actually is?
Oh yeah. There's always that sort of nagging thing in my head that's like, what, in 20 years or 30 years, what side of history am I going to be actually on? And did I actually the time and take the risk to look and go, all right, if I'm a follower of Jesus, but in 2018, where am I landing on a lot of these things that feel right? It's just like you said, it can feel so confusing and so cloudy, and yet I have to make a stand. I can't just do nothing, And I think about it a lot, and it can be kind of a little scary.
It's scary.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, I'm gonna let people ask questions. Some of our students ask you guys some questions.
Cool.
So if anybody wants to ask something, go ahead. Does anybody have anything that they're thinking about right now?
Did you?
Okay, this is Bethany.
Hi. Hi guys. Hi little honey.
Hi, Bethany.
So I come from Sydney, Australia.
All right.
And I work in a college with 300 residential students, and it's a Christian-based college, but you don't have to be Christian to go there. And I've tried starting these worship nights, but I find a lot of the Christians in college are they come from very traditional religious churches, I guess. And their songs that they sing are very old gospel hymns and everything. And when I go with my guitar, we sing stuff by you guys, but they feel very almost frightened of it. And I want to try and want to let God break that somehow. But I'm just wondering if you remember any nights like that where you guys were worshiping and maybe felt like the Spirit wasn't there, or fighting a rigid crowd of Christians or something like that. How did you deal with that? If
We've been there. We have.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, a lot of our early memories, right around the time we met Michael and we bought that house and all that stuff, there's a pretty big university here in our town, and so we jumped into a lot of worship nights and a lot of ministry nights. And it was definitely hit or miss in terms of, I would almost phrase it like it's hit or miss whether you feel alignment in your heart with the gathering, with the motivation of why everybody's in the room together. And sometimes people just show up because there's nothing better to do, or they, get shoved into it. And sometimes people really want to be there. And I think when people really want to be there, there's a bit of an openness, to like, even if they're not used to something or not used to a type of song or something, there's an openness to be interested and try and, learn something from what you have to share. And you certainly can't force someone to be open or be interested in something you're trying to share. Like there's no point. There's no point in forcing anybody to engage in something they don't want to engage in. And I think that's partially why we gravitated to just living rooms and realizing sometimes smaller is better, because trying to rally as many people as possible sometimes is not going to yield as much fruit, because just because you get somebody there doesn't mean they're going to be impacted.
Right.
So definitely don't be afraid of the small. Don't be afraid of a couple people in a room that have something on their hearts. And some really great memories we have is just being in these there's like a little prayer room in a basement on our college campus that we went to some worship nights at through the years. And there's just this little remnant of people that had a heart and a passion to see God move on the campus. And those are some incredible prayer times. Some of the bigger things we did and the bigger events we tried to be a part of on campus didn't feel quite as fruitful. For us, it's been hit or miss like that for years, not just on college campuses, but just in general, learning where we feel like we can be fruitful and where we feel like we will be received. And the thing that's on our heart to share is actually appropriate. And that takes time to figure that stuff out, but you have to, it's a matter of trying, trying and learning what feels fruitful and inspiring, and learning what just doesn't feel quite right. And
That made me think of like when you made the decision not to like play for different ministries and stuff too, because unless we had a relationship with them, or because there were some awkward scenarios where the message was something that we didn't necessarily agree with, but we were getting up and leading worship beforehand, which almost looks like we put our stamp of approval on it, and then we were there with a bunch of awkward moments after that.
We had quite a few awkward experiences over the years that just sort of led us to recognize that there's not as much value in just showing up to something just because you got invited to it. Like you actually have to use discernment to discover if it's something that you want to be a part of, generally that means for the most part you just kind of need to have a relationship with people to know that it's not going to be, from our perspective, you got to know it's not going to be really driven and aggressive and almost like manipulative sometimes, when people do events and just have a really, really strong agenda. That's what kind of makes us feel like that's not really how we roll. And so this feels a little unbalanced.
Does anybody else have any other questions? Yeah, Andre's got a question back here.
Hey guys, so kind of even maybe slightly piggyback off that. I'd say I can kind of agree that bringing in a smaller setting, generally can maybe yield more fruit or for one reason or another. But I think one thing I've noticed in a college setting is a huge desire to see or passion for inclusivity. And I think there are a lot, because I think we live in a culture where people are always hurt by groups that seem exclusive or whatever it is. So how do you kind of mesh that desire to be inclusive and welcoming people in, but at the same time, maybe not wanting to grow your setting too large in order to maybe get fruit? Or how, does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, we struggled with that for a long time.
That's a good question.
Yeah, I think with our house worship nights for years and years, like Michael's saying, we wrestled with like just how to open it up and make it accessible to more people, but how to not lose the intimacy of the thing. And I mean, for one, I think we're sort of talking about like with our event, we never marketed. So the beauty of it is it starts small with like 5 people, and then but there's still an utterly open spirit and heart about it. So like anybody who wants to, through word of mouth, can jump in on it. But we're not forcing it down anyone's throats. We're not marketing. We're not saying everybody needs to come to this. Invite your friend who needs to hear the gospel. We're not saying that stuff. We're just, but we're being open and inclusive at the same time in our like micro sort of way. Just in our own sphere of relationships, and that turned into hundreds of people getting together. But that takes time, and so I guess that's the difference, is allowing that to grow slowly versus trying to right out the gate, have a couple hundred people showing up, because most likely if they show up out of nowhere, there's going to be a very large percentage of those people that aren't really necessarily connecting. But if you let it grow slowly and organically, then most people that are there want to be there. And I think that's what we're trying to achieve. We actually had this question come up recently with a tour we did in England, because we had to decide whether to use a promoter that's really popular in England that would basically push our tour through all their promotion platforms. And his argument was, you guys will probably make the same amount of money, but you'll have like twice as many people at every show. And what we realized was, yeah, but none of those extra people will have any idea who we are or what message we carry, and probably won't even connect. Because a lot of times when people show up for something that they're not looking for, they're not ready for it, and they don't have expectation for it. And so there's not alignment there. So what we realized is we would rather use our own organic channels to invite people to come, and there'd be less people there, but everybody there wants to be there. And for us, that just feels healthier. And I mean, that looks different in different situations. And I know, there's limitations to your experience at university a lot of times, and you have this window of time to reach people. I guess I just feel like reaching a small number of people is a lot, in a huge way, is more special to me than than touching tons of people in a sense, in a shallow way.
Yeah. I also feel like the slow growth that we had helped us to be able to identify and define our identity. Our identity as a group. We were actually able to define like who we were and what we were about, because I feel like in every scenario there needs to be a season of just trying to figure out, what are we doing? What is our identity in this? And we're not, are we just a worship night, or is there actually more to this? And I felt like that slow growth helped us to define that. And then we were able to invite people into an identity and into an experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, anybody else have any questions?
I do.
Tyra.
Okay, this one's not
She's
as.
from Knoxville.
Yeah. Hi.
Tyra's from Knoxville.
Look at my shirt. No, but this isn't as serious as a question. Do you all have any desire of leaving Knoxville?
Say it again.
Do you have any desire of leaving Knoxville?
Leaving.
Why do you?
No, that's why I don't want you to.
I don't personally. I was born and raised in Knoxville. It's a small town. We do go out of town a lot, and I mean it's good for me, I think, to leave town, to leave my small town sometimes, because it reminds me of what's going on in the rest of the world. And it's easy to feel a little bit isolated when you just stay in a small town forever. So having the privilege to be able to leave on a regular basis and go experience different cities and different communities and what's going on in the rest of the world kind of makes it possible for me. But the slow pace and the small town feel is really inspiring and encouraging to me, probably just because that's how I was raised. So it's really valuable to me. But I mean, I love coming to California and visiting. We were just there. I was just there a week or two ago. And it's just a cool time, you know, in history where you can kind of stay plugged in a lot of places at once. But yeah, I love Tennessee.
Yeah. Nathan
wants to live in Santa Cruz, so.
Just hypothetically, but I'm very happy here in Knoxville, and we'll see.
Property prices are hard to beat.
Yeah.
That's true. We all heard an amen on that.
Amen.
Rental prices are hard to beat. Woo!
Yeah. Heck yeah.
I have a question.
Okay.
Part of what I love about the music that you guys create is the organic feel of it, and even the times we've had here. It's very spirit led, and the team that I play worship on, we are all about that. But from like a technical music standpoint, sometimes we have a hard time knowing how to create that on our own. Like I would say, each person like can participate in it and flow when they're not having to lead like instrumentally, or when it's not like with other people. So I'm wondering if there are like just tips, or like if you see like kind of nuts and bolts to being able to flow with a group of instrumentalists and just make space, to maybe go through a song, but then kind of see where the Lord takes it. At least even personally, like I find it hard to know where to go musically, like after this song is through, even though I want to. Am I making sense?
Absolutely. We learned how to do that in a living room, so we didn't have the full array of instruments. So it was actually way easier to grow into that with just a couple acoustic guitars and a djembe and stuff like that, because there's a lot more space to go off the grid, or like all of a sudden switch into a new chord progression, or slow the tempo down or speed it up. And then we kind of evolved into putting a band together, and slowly started using a drum kit and bass and all of it. And honestly, the only way we figured out how to do that was through years and years of experience together as a team. And so that maybe stings a little bit, I feel like, as far as a lot of church bands experience goes, because I know sometimes there's a lot of turnover, and you're trying to be inclusive and invite different players in and out, and it can be hard to get that kind of history together. In some ways, there's no way to speed up that process. But in any way you can, history together is important. So even if you can get together and allow your rehearsal in part to be an experience of, let's just see where we go musically at the end of this song and worship together and see what happens. And the more of those experiences you have at a service, outside of service, the more in tune and the more flexible you'll be able to be as a team. It's a lot of learning how to follow each other, and learning how to be sensitive to, a guy on a guitar just has this inkling of, I think if I just switch a minor key or something, it'll really move something. And being sensitive to hearing another player do that and then following that. And that's kind of what we learned. Nathan would just come in on a more upbeat rhythm or something, and that would sort of trigger something new. Or, one of us would start strumming chords, or one of us would start singing something. Right. It is a lot about taking risks, and sometimes, maybe a lot of the time, it doesn't always work. Yeah. It can fall flat on its face.
Oh yeah. Thankfully, it still does. On Tuesday nights, usually that's the place that I feel the most freedom. So we'll try things, and I'll hear something in my head, and I just have to take a guess whether it'll work. And a lot of times I try something, and then what I don't know is Will's already switched in his head to the next song, and I don't know. And sorry, I missed that. And it's fine now when we travel on the road. I take less risk because there's more pressure, right? There's, people showing up and they paid $20 for a ticket, and yeah, I'm going to take some risk, but it's going to probably be a little bit more conservative. So I don't know. There's just kind of different scenarios, different places for doing different things.
I think, it does depend on your church leaders and your congregation and how much expectation there is for a willingness, for you guys as a team to take some risks. And so it does depend on all that. So you have to kind of be able to read what's going to be fruitful in that situation. Like, is there going to be a responsiveness and a willingness for the whole room to go there with you? Step off a cliff and fail,
Yeah, because I feel like a lot of times on Sunday mornings there's a pressure to get it right, to be like really polished, and so if that sometimes doesn't like suit itself for taking risk, because the culture has got to be one where if it falls flat on its face, that everybody's still okay with it. Yeah, that your leaders are okay with it. Because I remember I've been in some church things and I've taken the risk and step out prophetically, and I get talked to by the leaders like, you know what, that the follow-up meetings that you guys have, don't do that next time because of whatever reason. And so you have to have that culture, that culture. I really also love what you said about the relationships are extremely important when it comes to being able to flow prophetically with each other. And I always say what draws relationships together is two things. It's either fun or it's pain. Fun and pain draw like relationships super tight. You can't predict the pain, obviously, but most people want to run away when there's pain. But it's the process of working through that pain that actually creates a very tight relationship. And when those moments happen, count them as blessings, because honestly, it's going to bring you guys as a team closer together. In those cases. Yeah, you got any question?
Yeah. I think I can speak for at least a few of us in here that we either want to be or trying to be in that type of community, like where we are at, whether it involves worship and music heavily or just relationship building. I think a lot of us are desiring that or trying to start that. Or so looking back at your journey, more from a relationship, a community standpoint, what is maybe the most important thing that you learned to prioritize, maybe personally or collectively, or maybe if this applies more, what's the biggest thing that you would do different going back, things that you learned from on your journey?
Great question.
That's a deep one.
I think the first thought that pops in my head is it's really interesting in my life to think there's always like different phases and seasons in life, and there's people that I would be in a relationship with that I felt like we were best friends. We were gonna, so tight, and then years go on, and now I barely stay in touch. And how it's hard, it's impossible to know that in the moment, but it doesn't. But you can't sort of predict that, so you have to be all in. And I think there's this tension of we have a heart for community, we have a heart for growing a relationship with people, but you also don't necessarily know who those people are. And I don't think we're supposed to know. We're supposed to be all in life, And I think when I look back, it's just a process of just paying attention to the people that are in front of you and being wholehearted and being a good friend, looking out for other people's needs, and knowing that there's seasons and a lot of relationships sort of are fluid and change, and that by the grace of God, sometimes there are people that God that he's doing the knitting together. And when I look back over a long period of time, I can see it, but it's really hard to know in the moment. And I don't think we're supposed to know. I think we're supposed to be fully present, but also hold people loosely, because what happens in a lot of churches is we manipulate and control because we want this thing that's good. So we hold on to people when they really need to be let go. And lot of pain happens, I think, when we like, no, you have to be my best friend. You know, like.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, I would phrase it like I think growing up, I tended to do the pendulum swing from like ultimate vulnerability to like ultimate just withdrawing. So like vulnerability and boundaries tend to be this side, like two sides of the coin that are on opposite ends of the spectrum. Like I'm going to be 100% intimate, or I'm going to have 100% boundaries. And sometimes the response to a little bit of that tugging are like relationships that are saying, no, but you have to be my friend because this is community and it's what God calls us to. Like you have to be intimate with me. You have to talk about everything that's wrong. Sometimes the response can be like,
Whoa.
Like, no, I'm boundaries here. I can't go there. I won't go there. Like, and sometimes it's easy to do that. For me, it was like there were a number of years of, I just knew I wanted intimacy in friendship. So I really, really dug in. And then I got pretty burned in moments and pretty wounded. And so then I started to disconnect and unplug and not give myself to friends anymore. And it's almost like learning to hold those things in two hands simultaneously always is what it means to be fully alive, fully human. Because we can't let go of boundaries because we have to be we have to maintain who we are as people, who we are as people that, you know, God has called you to be in your own nature and be whole and be complete and be yourself. And you are called to guard that and protect that and know what health looks like and know when to not be manipulated by other people's brokenness. But we're also called to be vulnerable and pursue intimacy at the exact same time. And really, that's what all relationship is. That's what marriage is. That's what friendship is. And so it's learning the both end of it, like those two things, being able to live together instead of swing one way or the other.
Right.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I hope that made sense. I don't know.
Thank you.
Simon has a question for you.
You guys mentioned about going to Mozambique and spending time with Heidi Baker and coming back to Knoxville and just bringing that fire back into the community and try to create and pursue what God has called you guys to. And my question is, like, when I go back to Vancouver, I'm going to be working as a children's pastor again, but then at the same time working as a manager at a bakery and cafe. And, you know, all the church members, like I see the parents and young adults and other elders, they're all, you know, so busy in their lives and trying to have a spirit-filled life. But it's hard for me as a leader to give that spirit-filled life when I don't have it myself sometimes. And my question is, how did you guys keep that fire when you came back to your hometown?
That's a good question.
That was a good question many years ago.
Yeah, I feel like I could answer that when that happened, which was like when we were 19 or 20. And I could also speak to my current experience and learning how to embrace that. Like we had a lot of flexibility when we were 19, and that was part of the beauty of that moment. Because it was, like we said, it was dirt cheap to live in Knoxville, and so we didn't have to work a ton to be able to survive, and we were able to give a lot of time to spending time together and staying encouraged and staying inspired and spending time with God and pulling off of each other that kind of inspiration and fire and passion. And obviously, yeah, when you get busy and when you've got to work and when you've got to multitask, that gets harder. We did live a little bit of a charmed existence in that moment because we did have a lot of time and we were able to stumble into some of that. We were able to like maintain a lot of that passion and energy because we just decided we were going to prioritize it over, you know, building our careers in that moment or building having tons of income or crazy lifestyles or whatever.
It was like, how can we work the least amount of hours but have just enough money?
Yeah,
to like
just like hang out and be friends and talk about God. And it was a really special season, but that season ended for us, and life moved on. And my life today sounds a lot more like, what your experience will be going back home, where you're multitasking and you're working, and a lot of the people you're fellowshipping with and trying to encourage are doing the same. And for me today, I think it's really important to remember that you have to forgive your current experience for being broken and for not being perfect. And it's so easy to look at your experience and look at all the things that are wrong and say, I just can't be intimate with God or have strong spirituality. I just can't because I'm too busy. And it's very like grass is greener thing. Like just thinking if only I could be in a different situation or be somebody else or be like that guy or that girl, then I could probably be more spiritual. But I think step one is just forgiving my broken situation for being what it is and recognizing that God actually is really interested in meeting me in that exact moment. And yeah, maybe there's a couple decisions I can make to reprioritize my time and my focus. But step one is just forgiveness. Step one is letting go of despair or depression or anxiety or I wish I was somebody else. I wish I was somewhere else. I wish I was in a different community. It's like we've got to forgive that stuff and actually start being thankful for who we are and for what God's given us and where we are. Because every bit of it is a gift, even if it's really broken and confusing. Just finding the beauty there and finding spirituality in your car on your way to work, inspiration is always there for the taking.
Speaking of life, I have a little brand new infant at home and a toddler, and I think my wife is probably wondering if I'm ever going to come home. So I probably need to go in a second. Maybe I don't know if you want to do one more question. It's somebody who has the most burning question that's unanswered.
Last question. Who's got a burning question?
That's one.
Okay, Neilani has a question.
So I was wondering, from the very beginning, even up until now, in your worship, have you ever experienced, a fear of being received, or has it ever prevented you from fully being vulnerable in that place of worship? And how do you get through that? How do you carry yourself through that?
I think that's a constant fear. I think maybe that's a constant fear in life in general, whether you're going to be received. But in our experience, at least for me as a worship leader, I've just kind of made up my mind really early on in my pursuit to learn how to lead worship. I just sort of made up my mind that vulnerability had to be my strength. And if I didn't have that, I feel like I didn't really have much. So I just knew that if there's going to be any value, it was going to be because I was kind of laying my heart on the table and being vulnerable. And I just kind of decided I was going to live and die by that principle. And sometimes it didn't pan out well, but over the years, I began to see the big picture growth of it. You can't define success or value just by one experience. You have to allow the big picture narrative to speak louder than your one experience, because there's certainly those days where you walk away from worship times feeling like, oh my gosh, that was literally the most embarrassing thing that's ever happened to me, and I just don't know if I need to do this again. I can say the same thing in friendships and relationships. There's those days where you have conversations and you're like, that was hurtful and painful, and I just don't know if I can pursue this anymore. But when we step back and look at that big picture, we, vast majority of the time, see the growth that's happening and see that in time it'll yield, yield fruit, yield results.
Man, that's good.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for giving us some of your time.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, guys.
We love you.
Thank you guys very much. We appreciate it. We love you. We're stoked about what's going on this week.
Okay.
Have a great time.
Awesome.
Bye-bye.
All right, love you guys. Woo, woo, woo.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.